Hello, friends and nonprofit leaders. Laura Zelke here. I'm your host of the Your Nonprofit Life podcast, and today is the second in our series featuring nonprofit leaders who offer an informed perspective on the current refugee crisis, immigration and refugee resettlement, voter education, and the effect of the pandemic on the lives of Black women survivors of domestic abuse. Today, I'm honored to interview the founder and executive director of Refugee Assistance Alliance, Kristen Bloom. As someone who never intended to start her own nonprofit, Kristen shares how being a military spouse prepared her to serve the refugee population in our country. Like many nonprofit founders, Kristen recognized the need for new refugees. People who've been invited by the U.S. government to seek refuge in our country. Refugees, here by invitation. She recognized their need to learn English. And since she had experience teaching English as a second language, she volunteered to fill the gap, only to realize on her first visit that the gap she thought she was needed to fill was really more like a massive chasm. Throwing her plans out the window, Kristen created a new organization to address the immediate needs of refugee families, social, emotional, and physical. I'm so grateful for the Nonprofit Leadership Lab because our members are incredible human beings. I can't wait for you to meet Kristen Bloom and hear about her journey into nonprofit leadership and what she's done to manage her imposter syndrome. Because we all know, the struggle is real. Hey, have you ever wished you could hear some good news for a change? Well, I might have just what you've been hoping for. Welcome to Your Nonprofit Life, where we remove our rose-colored glasses and explore what leaders are actually doing to move their nonprofits from messy to thriving without burning out in the process. I'm Laura Zelke, Director of Member Experience for the Nonprofit Leadership Lab. Join me each week to explore the ups, downs, and whoopsie daisies of your nonprofit life. Let's get started. Well, Kristen Bloom, I'm so excited to have you here on the Your Nonprofit Life podcast. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Laura. I'm super excited to be here. I'm a podcast junkie, so this is like my dream.
Oh, well, I'm so excited to have you. I know I've been saying this a lot lately, but I actually did have kind of a wish list of lab members that I wanted to interview because I think you and I kind of connected in a fundraising boot camp and we were going through your elevator pitch and trying to tweak it and refine it. And I just fell in love with your mission and I'm just grateful to have you here. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but your husband is military, right? And is he deployed right now?
Yes, my husband is in the Air Force and he's deployed for 4 months. We're about a third of the way through. It's sort of like the pandemic. The days are slow, but all of a sudden it's like, oh, a third of the way through.
Yeah.
But it also feels like we've been gone for 5 years.
I bet. And it seems like you and I had talked about this before, where the pandemic has really shifted how this particular deployment is going, because what was it, the support you normally have didn't?
Yeah, so my parents are retired, and so usually when my husband is gone, they'll come for about 2 months or something and just help me as much as they can. And then my in-laws come and people trade in and out. And so it's a huge help. But, now in the pandemic, the kids are home more, everyone's working from home, and I'm having no support. It's a lot.
I would say so. Are you finding time or are you able to take any time for self-care during this?
Yes, I'm trying to make it a priority. And luckily, one of my best friends is also helping me make it a priority. She invited me to a girls' weekend last weekend and said, I don't know if you can make this work, but if you can drive to see me, we're going to a winery to spend the night and my husband will watch your kids. So I thought I will rearrange everything to be there.
And so how was it?
Oh my gosh, it was amazing. I felt like we were on this little European vacation for a day. The weather could not have been more perfect. The winery looked like a castle in the mountains, and we just sat outside and enjoyed each other's company. Back to the real world the next day, but for that one day, it felt phenomenal.
First of all, I'm so glad that you said yes to that and didn't decline the offer, because self-care is critical. and you can hold on to that. One of the things I learned, this is so interesting, well, to me anyway, but years ago, I went to a Chamber of Commerce meeting. We lived in Fallon, Nevada, or we like to call it Fallon, America. Like it's this tiny little town an hour east of Reno in the middle of kind of nowhere. And they had a guy come in from Reno, and he was talking about tourism and how there are 3 stages to tourism. And that is the planning stage, and then the actual taking vacation or whatever it is, and then thinking back on it. And when you look at something like self-care, for example, you're not just having the self-care the day that you're at the winery. I mean, that's part of it, of course, obviously, right? But thinking about it, anticipating it is also a little form of self-care, like knowing that you have that on the horizon, even if it's a last minute trip, all the time that you're able to think about how nice it's going to be to get away, whatever. And then you have that experience, which is lovely. And hopefully you took some pictures to kind of remind yourself. But then after the event also is part of that as well, because now you can think back to how wonderful that was. And so one of the keys that I'm always kind of harping on members that I talk to, when you do self-care, always plan the next one. Like always have one in the hopper that you can be looking forward to and that you know it's coming up. And so it just may be something to get on your calendar. But I think self-care is critical, especially right now in the pandemic. And you can get real creative with it. It doesn't have to be anything super fancy, but just even a day away like that or an afternoon away can really fill your tank.
That is such a cool idea. I like that. And it is so true to have those 3 phases. The girls who went, we were all joking, like, as moms, next time we could just go to a local hotel and stay in our jammies and take a nap, and it would be amazing.
Right? Exactly. I know there's a nonprofit called the NAP Ministry, and their whole mission is about undoing this idea of this working yourself to death kind of culture, and that naps are actually generative for your soul and also equity. It's very interesting. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So, Kristen, by this point, I will have given kind of a brief introduction at the very, very beginning, a little snippet about what you all do, but why don't you introduce yourself and your organization?
All right. So my name is Kristen Bloom. I am the founder and executive director of Refugee Assistance Alliance. We are based in Miami, Florida, and our main goal is really to support refugees coming from the Middle East, Asia, and Africa as they rebuild their lives in South Florida. A lot of people don't know that when refugees come to the US, they only receive 3 to 6 months of assistance, and then they're left on their own after that. And so we just kind of put ourselves in their shoes and realize that, oh my gosh, I cannot even imagine being left alone after 6 months in a country when I don't know the language, I can't read my mail. And we particularly focus on refugees from the Middle East, Asia, and Africa because we found that they don't typically have any embedded migrant communities to tap into in Miami. A lot of people think of Miami and think of the Latin American community. And it's not to say that refugees and immigrants coming from those parts of the world don't struggle as well, but there are so many amazing organizations in Miami already there to help them. And they have relatives that they can tap into and communities to tap into. And we just didn't see that kind of support network for the refugees that we work with. So we're here to be their friend, to be a cultural mentor. You know, we always say that the clients that we work with are more courageous, have been through more in their lives in the past few years than many of us will experience in a lifetime. And so we're not here to save them or empower them. We're just here to walk alongside them as they rebuild.
Well, I just think that is beautiful. I have to say, I don't know that I've really thought about Miami as a place where refugees from Middle Eastern countries are necessarily resettling. I do tend to think of Cuba and Latin American countries. That's really interesting, that gap that you're filling there. So let me ask you this. How did you find your way into the nonprofit sector? Is this something that you went to college for? Is it something that you were trained to do? Or how did you end up deciding to found a nonprofit?
It was completely and totally unplanned, and I am a big planner. So this, I feel like, is totally out of my wheelhouse. Honestly, like you had mentioned earlier, my husband's in the Air Force and we had just moved to Miami. And when we moved to Miami, my kids were 1 and 4. And I told my husband, I just want to take a little break from working right now. I had been working full time up until that point, and especially with my 1-year-old, I felt like, gosh, I feel like I barely spent any time with her in the first year of her life.
What was your job?
Oh, yeah. When we moved to Miami from Mississippi and I was working at Mississippi State University, I started by teaching English as a second language.
Okay.
So that comes into play
Okay.
with Refugee Assistance Alliance. So I'll keep going and then talk a little bit about that. But so we moved to Miami, and 6 months in, I told my husband, whoa, this is way harder than I anticipated. I thought it would be hard to become a stay-at-home mom, but I significantly underestimated doing it in a new city where I didn't know anyone. So to be honest, I was just looking for a way to get involved in something that I could do for myself outside of the house.
Mm-hmm.
I attended a Syrian supper club dinner. 2 Syrian chefs who came to Miami as refugees with their families. They'd been here about 6 months at the time. They cooked a traditional meal, and I just felt like I was thriving there at the dinner. Like I was amongst people who also were there because they wanted to welcome these families. And I just felt like I was with people who had a similar mindset as me. And at the dinner, everyone kept saying, how can we help? Do you need furniture? Do you need clothes? And they kept repeating over and over, we need help finding jobs and we need help learning English. So because I had taught English as a second language before, as a side note, I'm not professionally trained to teach English as a second language. I actually got my first job teaching English when we lived in Japan, and I got hired because they told me my English was very good.
That's great.
Thank you. Anyway, trial by fire. So I thought, oh, well, this is how I can get involved. I'm looking for a way. This is perfect. I can teach English once a week to a family. I'll get my time away. It's good for them. It's good for me. So I taught English like a good little English teacher. I went prepped with my lesson, and I got to their house that day, and I was there for about 3 hours, and we never even touched the English lesson that I prepared because this family just started inundating me with questions. They'd been in the US already for 1 year, and they brought out this huge stack of mail that was not something that they had just piled up in the past week. And I remember thinking, like, how long have they been saving this for? And who were they going to ask if I didn't come? And so we took all this time going through their mail. Then they brought up another stack of mail with all these papers coming home from school because they had 3 school-aged children. And I always give people the example, like, imagine if you move to a foreign country, you don't even recognize the alphabet, and you're getting all these things home from your kid's school, and you're using Google Translate or something to try to translate it. Well, even something as simple as a field trip permission slip, if you're Google translating field trip, it's translating literally as a trip to the field, and they're thinking, why are you taking my kids to the field, and why would I give my kids permission to do that? So it's just like all these little things that we take for granted and don't even think about. The mom was also pregnant at the time, so she was asking me all these questions about, why did I have to pay for my prenatal vitamins? We have insurance, and all these things. And I just left their house that day, and I got in my car, and before I even left, I just thought, if I wasn't here, who were they going to ask these questions to?
Right.
So I went back to the organizers of the dinner and said, yeah, these families need help learning English, but it seems like they need more than that. They need somebody to help them navigate their life here. And so because I was new to Miami at the time and didn't know anyone, the organizers of the dinner said, oh, well, we'll put out a call on Facebook asking if there are other volunteers who want to help. There are about 20 families or so that they're working with at the time. And we put out this call, and I blindly volunteered to organize those volunteers. About 50 people responded to that initial call, which was amazing. And here I am today, 3 years later, still organizing those volunteers.
I mean, this is the way that nonprofits get started a lot of times, and that is you're seeing the need, you see a gap. It's not that there aren't other refugee organizations, but they're not focused on the people group that you saw, this is a gap. So you decided that you wanted to do something about it. So have you lived in Miami the whole time that you've been founding and running this organization?
Well, Laura, that was the plan, but the Air Force had other plans for us. First, let me say, honestly, before I started the organization, I did hem and haw a lot if that was the right thing for me, because I am an Air Force spouse and I knew we wouldn't be in Miami full time. But I just kept thinking, like, if I turn my back on these families, who is going to continue helping them? And
Mhm.
they've been isolated for so long. I felt like it was just another person leaving them. And so I felt very strongly that if it wasn't me, we had to find a way to have some kind of infrastructure to help them. And I thought, all right, well, we're supposed to be in Miami for about 3 years. By the time I move, the organization will have gotten its sea legs and have a solid foundation. So when we move, we can find somebody to replace me or whatever. And then 6 months later, my husband came home and said, so I have to tell you something.
Uh-oh.
And we were getting transferred to Alabama. So we moved to Alabama for 1 year when the organization was about 8 months old. And then a year
Wow.
later, we moved to Tampa. So I've moved 3 times,
Oh,
or this is my third city since starting RAA 3 years ago.
wow. And it's still based in Miami. Like you didn't move the organization with you per se. I guess the people that you serve, you're still serving the Miami
Yes, we're
community.
still serving the Miami community. I mean, honestly, our long-term goal is we would love to expand to other cities and help other underserved populations. And we like to use the word underserved because in certain areas, the underserved community might not be people from the Middle East. It might be people from Latin America.
Sure.
But no, that hasn't happened yet. So we've focused the past 3 years on really building the foundation in Miami, and we're still only working with families. We work in Miami-Dade and Broward counties.
Wow. So that's a pretty huge chunk, isn't it, of
Yeah,
Florida?
it's the most populous areas in Florida. So yeah, we work with a lot of people.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And so let's talk a little bit about what RAA, Refugee Assistance Alliance, actually does. Like, what is it exactly that y'all
Okay, so
do?
we started out by teaching English primarily to the mothers in the family. Like I said, I had volunteered to teach English to this one family. And when I went to the family, I realized after a couple of sessions, okay, the dad is learning English a little bit at his job, or honestly, maybe even a little bit of Spanish, but he's still getting out into the community. The kids are going to school, and like all kids, some learn faster than others, but they're learning a lot of English. But for the moms, I felt like they were the ones who were really isolated. Many of the moms in our program don't drive. A lot of them have young children. For many reasons, they weren't able to go to the established English classes in town. And so we'll start by teaching the moms. Another thing I always tell people is a lot of them have very limited education. And so just going to a formal education program can be incredibly intimidating, especially in Miami, where the majority of the other students in the class are speaking in Spanish. So we've even had some of our students who tried going to those established English classes, and they're great classes. I'm not knocking them, but when you've been out of the formal school system for so long, and then you go and everyone in your class, when there's downtime, turns and speaks Spanish amongst themselves. And for a lot of these classes, the teacher is either a native Spanish speaker or bilingual. It's so intimidating. And our students already feel isolated in their communities, and going to that just made them feel again like they stuck out. And so a lot of them said, I tried doing that and I'm not going back. So we provide individualized lessons. One of the main strengths of our program is that we do individualize our services to our clients and what they need. Like many moms, quickly they started asking, will you help my kids instead of me? My kids are the ones who really need help, because homework started coming home and the mom said, because we can't speak English, we can't read the homework and we can't help our kids with homework. So we expanded to help kids with homework. In COVID, like many nonprofits, we've had to completely pivot again. Now we are providing tutors for complete remote learning. Some families have up to 6 tutors because there are a lot of kids and there's a lot of work to be done.
Wow.
Yeah, we're really proud to be able to be offering that. Last year, it took a couple of weeks for us to shift everything, but when everything went remote in March, we were able to get assistance for all the kids, and every single kid in our program passed to the next grade, which is not only because of our volunteers. Our kids work incredibly hard, but because their parents can't navigate not only the language, but a lot of them don't have the digital skills. I mean, I joke all the time, I did my master's degree online and I was having a hard time with my son's first grade e-learning because, we're just having to learn all these new platforms.
Yeah.
So we do a lot, mostly education based. We do a lot of the women in our program have learned enough English that now they're working on their GED. We've had a couple women get their GED, which is super exciting. Some are moving on to other certifications like childcare certification, or they want to go to community college. We've also helped a lot with job assistance, searching for jobs, job applications, resumes, interviewing for jobs. And in non-COVID times, we have community events because one of the main things that I mentioned earlier is that these families don't have an embedded migrant community to turn to. And Miami is very spread out. And I mentioned we work in two different counties. So our families, some of them live an hour and a half away from each other. So
Oh,
a lot
wow.
of people ask, like, well, can't they form a community amongst themselves? But not really, because they live in pockets. Like 3 families live here, and then another 4 families live 40 minutes away from there. And so it's really hard for them to build that network amongst themselves. And so for us, we see our volunteers as that network for them, because our volunteers are spread all over the place too. And so we do these community events to introduce our clients to other community members and to really build that support network for them.
That sounds interesting. And I'm wondering, do they have computers? Have you done anything online, like any Zoom socials or anything like that, to try and get the families, even though they're so physically distanced, to use the technology to try and at least have some kind of semblance of connection?
Yeah, so every year we do a fundraiser, prior to COVID, to help get technology into these families' homes, because we did learn, after we started helping the kids with homework, that a lot of kids were being assigned assignments they were supposed to complete online, and they didn't have the device that they needed. A lot of the programs, they have to have a tablet or a computer, and they only had their parents' phone or something like that. So every year we do a fundraiser to get technology in their homes. And then when everything shifted for COVID, the school districts were offering laptops, thank goodness. And so we had volunteers helping the families figure out how to get those. In some families, our volunteers also worked with the families to help them get higher speed internet, increase their broadband, and things like that. I think we would all agree that this pandemic has been a blessing and a curse in many ways. It has allowed all of us to find new ways of connecting. And I would say for our families, that has been a huge blessing, because many of them do have very, very, very limited digital literacy skills. So asking them to join a Zoom call before was, oh my gosh, a huge ask.
Yeah, I was going to say, probably like trying to get my mom and dad to get on a Zoom call.
Yeah, and so
not the easiest thing.
Yeah, and there are so many things that I guess we just take for granted or don't think about, like even getting them the laptops. We gifted them the laptops and then found out a lot of them don't know how to turn on the laptop or open a browser. What is a browser? And so the good thing about COVID is that a lot of them have learned so many more digital literacy skills. And so now we have started doing monthly talks with our clients. Sometimes they're educational, like we have one coming up on citizenship, because many of them are about to approach the 5-year mark where they can apply for citizenship. And then sometimes, like the one we had last month, was just a coffee date, but check in with them. How are you doing? Let's talk. How's e-learning? How are you feeling? Things like that.
It really has been quite the year for everyone. And especially, with my day-to-day is working with the nonprofit leaders in the Nonprofit Leadership Lab and having that focus and seeing how hard you all have worked to continue moving your mission forward in new and different ways than you ever thought you would this early in the game. Kind of threw the timeline out the window, actually. And so your organization, it sounds like the organization is still relatively young. How old is your organization?
We will celebrate our official 3-year third birthday in November.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. So you're a toddler.
Yes, we are.
So you're the founder of the organization, and your education was on teaching, right? Is that what you said? Teaching English as a second language?
My formal background is in international relations, but my master's degree is in global education, but I've never had official teaching. My teaching was trial by fire in Japan.
Right. It's like I was thinking, really, I don't know a lot of Japanese. I only know, domo arigato, Mr. Roboto, which is really sad. That, and I know how to order my hibachi at the local Japanese restaurant. but I never learned. I actually did learn Spanish. I had it all through junior high and high school. And so I can say habla español with the best of them, but not Japanese. And I certainly would have struggled doing English as a second language in a country that didn't have like Latin as the root language. So your organization's been around for like 3 years now, and you weren't trained to run a nonprofit. So what's that been like? Because you basically hit the ground running. The need was already there, and it quickly turned from a volunteer into an organization. What's that been like for you?
Oh, goodness. It's been like nothing I could have imagined, for better, for worse. I mean, it's one of those things where I'm so glad and I can't imagine not having done it now. But I don't know. I guess it's one of those like ignorance is bliss kind of situations. When I volunteered to organize,
Yes.
yeah. And the more you know, the more you don't know. I would say those are my two phrases. When I volunteered to organize these volunteers, they started in about May or June of 2017. So when RA became an official nonprofit, we had already been tutoring for a couple of months. But then it got to the point where people were saying like, well, can I make a donation to this? And I thought, well, I can't take your money as Kristen Bloom's English program, and even things like protecting our clients. Our clients are incredibly vulnerable and things like that. So we wanted to formalize, but I've never even worked for a nonprofit before, let alone run one. I joke with people all the time that I am on such a steep learning curve. I feel like I'm constantly fighting not to fall backwards. It's just amazing. I mean, like I said, my background is in teaching English as a second language. And I remember reading this book called The E Myth. Have you ever read that?
Actually, I have read that.
Oh, wow. So you'll know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it was recommended reading for me. Somebody told me you need to read that book because of being self-employed. I've been self-employed since 1997.
Yeah, exactly. And for anyone who hasn't read it, the premise is that a lot of entrepreneurs start their business because they're passionate about something. So for me, when I met these families, I felt English, I feel like is, if there's one thing I can give you, English is your ticket to break this cycle of isolation and poverty for a lot of these families, because you can get a better job and you can help your kids and this, that, and the other thing. And since I started the organization, I haven't taught English once. That is the E-myth. It's like you start this to do the thing that you love, and then once you become the CEO, the executive director, whomever, you often never do that.
Yeah, everything changes. That's the truth.
Just learning. I'd never been a fundraiser before. I've never written a grant before. I know nothing about marketing. My friends in my personal life tease me that I have a very weak social media presence. So everything, every little aspect of running a nonprofit, it's like, oh my gosh, I have to learn how to do that. And then in the beginning, when you can't afford to hire anyone, it's like, well, I guess I better learn how to use QuickBooks. I guess I better learn how to make a newsletter. All of these things. And so it's just a lot. I would say that I suffer a lot from imposter syndrome still to this day, even though we're almost 3 years old. I still feel like I don't know what I'm doing, and I have to remind myself we've come so far in 3 years.
Yeah.
I know it's so cliche, but Rome wasn't built in a day, and it's true. It takes a long time to get to where you want to be, and it can be very overwhelming.
Yeah, it can. And having a startup, the startup phase really lasts longer than 3 years. So you're still kind of in startup mode, even though you've been doing it and you have a really good track record with the people that you've been serving. There's still a couple years left of this really getting it off the ground. And I totally can identify with the imposter syndrome and what that feels like on a day-to-day basis. And so it seems, like I said earlier, you kind of started the organization, but you were already doing the work. And so it's almost like you started out a little behind the 8 ball. Do you feel like you've gotten out in front of it at all with your mission? Because you've had the moves and you guys have been around for 3 years. So there's been so much change and then COVID, but do you feel like you're still trying to catch up, or are you out in front of it now, or what's that like?
Both. I feel like in a lot of ways, yeah, we've come a long ways. I mean, when I moved the first time, we hired a director of operations. Her name is Jamie Everett. She is amazing, and there's no way RAA could have continued going without her. We have an incredibly supportive board of directors. But yeah, when I think about it, I have a hard time, I should say, as far as imposter syndrome goes, always looking at other organizations and thinking, how are they doing that? How did they get that grant? They're so much bigger than us and they're only 2 years old, And so I have to constantly
Mm-hmm.
remind myself, as my friend Brene says, stay in your lane,
Yep.
take things one step at a time. And if I look back, we have improved leaps and bounds from when we first started and getting grants from some well-known funders in Miami. This year, we were talking about technology and I didn't mention, but another major change for us has been the ability to offer some group English classes. We've never been able to do that before because the women in our program don't have transportation and their schedules can be really difficult and things like that. And then sometimes they don't live near anyone who's in the same level as them. And so now we've been able to pair them by levels, and we purchased this incredible platform that's actually used to teach English by Miami-Dade public schools and some of the other adult education programs in Miami. It's used in many countries around the world. We're partnering with university students who are studying to become teachers of English language learners. And so they're teaching our adults now. And all of this stuff, I think like, wow, look at us. We're professionalizing. This is really legitimate. And so, yeah, if I stop and pause and think about where we started and where we are now, I can see that we've come so far. But still, I don't know when I'll ever get rid of the imposter syndrome because
Yeah.
it is so true. The more you know, the more you don't know. And I'll attend webinars. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's such a good idea. How would we ever do that?
Right. And some of it is just jotting those things down and knowing that not right now, but later, that's something to do. I mean, look at this. You're a podcast guest. You're doing it.
Yeah.
There is no imposter. You're doing it. It's just that feeling of, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
And I don't know that we ever get rid of it, but we certainly can turn the volume down on that little voice and turn up the volume of everyone who's lifting you up and strengthening you and giving you the training you need. Like Joan always says, when it gets real bad, go touch the work, go do it. Because it is hard when you get in more of that administrative position where you're now not necessarily interacting with the people that you're serving. It can start to feel a little surreal in a way, like that you're just not in with the people anymore,
Right.
and so I think that's really important. And I wonder how things have shifted for you under the current administration, under the policies that we have regarding refugees. I know I've mentioned before on the podcast, but I usually record more than one episode in a day just because I have other things to do. And I try and batch it a little bit. And I was talking with Helen Perry from Global Response Management, and she was differentiating immigrants versus refugees and how refugees really are basically coming here for asylum and how they're fleeing just horrific conditions in their homeland or whatever. And I wonder, has that affected you at all? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, refugee resettlement has always traditionally had bipartisan support. It's up to the executive office to set a cap for the number of refugees who will be allowed to enter into the United States. And if I didn't say this earlier, it's still worth repeating. We are currently in the worst refugee crisis in history. There are about 26 million refugees worldwide, and something that I always find shocking every time I say it is 99% of those refugees will never be offered resettlement. 99% of 26 million people.
Wow.
So, of the 1% who are resettled, the US typically takes the most vulnerable cases. It can be the elderly, people who have certain medical conditions, women and children. So, the US has always been a safe haven for these people, a place of refuge, a welcoming country. And typically the cap for refugees is around 100,000. Sometimes it's a little higher, sometimes it's a little lower. But under the past 5 previous presidential administrations, it's been around 100,000. And this year it's 18,000. And so, yeah, it's had a major impact on our work.
So that's less than a fifth of what it has been.
Mm-hmm.
How has that impacted your work?
It's impacted us. I mean, first, we only see refugees trickling in, and then with COVID, all admissions have pretty much halted. But even prior to COVID, because the numbers were so low, so few people were coming in. And one major way that this hurts is that the refugee resettlement agencies who offer assistance to them when they first arrive, they pick them up at the airport, help them set up their apartments, get the kids enrolled in school, set up with food stamps and health insurance and all of these things. These agencies are having to close their doors because they no longer have the funding to stay alive, to keep going. And so for us at Refugee Assistance Alliance, we feel like this is even more reason for why we need to be here, because those agencies, since they are federally funded, can come and go. But as a community-based organization, we tell our clients we're always going to be here. And so
Yeah.
they receive official assistance for only 3 to 6 months, like I mentioned. But, if a year down the line they have a question, a lot of times they will go back to their caseworkers and ask. But now that the numbers are so low and funding has been cut so drastically, those caseworkers aren't there anymore. So if we weren't here, who are they going to turn to? I feel like a broken record saying it, but it's true. There's the official people who are there to support them aren't there anymore. And so I just found it so shocking. Not only had I not worked for a nonprofit organization before, but I also didn't know anything really about the refugee resettlement process. And I just found it so shocking. Like, what do you mean you come here and you only get 6 months of assistance? We don't teach you English, or, we don't help you with any of this stuff. And it's like, could you imagine after 6 months being left in
Yeah.
Syria or Eritrea? I mean, oh my gosh.
Right. It's hard to imagine. And English is a really complicated language to learn, I think. The spelling, the enunciation, accents, all the things. I know that when I moved to North Carolina back in 2000, I could not order a bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit at Bojangles, which is like my favorite breakfast fast food place here in North Carolina. They could not understand me. And I was speaking English, but I wasn't saying biscuit right. I don't know how I said it because I had to practice how to say biscuit like a North Carolinian. I'm not even joking. This is so true. I would have to order like number 4 because they couldn't understand me. And I can't imagine moving to a completely different country. You're traumatized, first of all. You finally get there and there's nobody to teach you the language. And your kids are supposed to be in school and you don't know how to read the forms and there's no one there to help you. And it sounds like the people that take them from the airport, those organizations are not around anymore.
Well, in Miami, the majority of them have closed. So we partner with those organizations. That's how we get our clients, and that's how we get the majority of our referrals. But right now, there's only one, and the majority of our clients are resettled by International Rescue Committee. IRC is a very well-known organization, both not only in the US, but worldwide. And the IRC office has closed its doors in Miami and
Wow.
potentially might never open again. And so it's just like, yes, there are some agencies still receiving refugees. The one we work with in Miami is called Church World Service, but there are a lot of others that have closed their doors and aren't there anymore. And so, of course, at Refugee Assistance Alliance, we hope that the refugee cap will be raised, that more refugees will be able to come into the United States, because we believe in a welcoming America and creating a welcoming environment for our newest neighbors. But the thing is, if the number is raised, which hopefully it is, what's going to happen? Because right now we don't even have the infrastructure in place to support all of those people coming.
Yeah.
Because funding was cut so drastically that they had to close. So
The picture that you're painting of the families that you serve is very different than some of the narrative that I've been hearing in the news about people framing it more like these people are coming here to take over or to take the jobs or whatever. It sounds to me like refugees who are coming in, specifically from the countries that you mentioned earlier, they're not going to be able to come in and take over somebody's job. They don't even speak the language.
right.
So this is like a false narrative that's been going on. And it actually diminishes the diversity and richness of community, right? And it's almost like instilling a fear. So I'm really interested in learning how the refugees are feeling. Do they feel welcomed when they come to this country? Like I'm talking 2020. Do they feel welcomed here?
I mean, of course, I can only give the perspective of the refugees we work with in Miami, but I will
Mhm.
say, I mean, Miami has people from all over the world in it, and
Mhm.
you ask our clients this a lot. How do you feel? Do you feel that you aren't accepted, or do you feel that people look at you differently or whatever? But I will say, for the most part, they all say, yeah, we feel welcome, but they feel isolated. I'll never forget one of our clients told us a story. Her English is quite good now, but she was saying, she left Syria. And I just want to reiterate that a lot of these families, if given the choice, they would go back to their home country in a second. Many of them left behind their mom, their dad, their siblings, and they don't know if they'll ever see them again. And so
Mm.
it's just so heartbreaking that here they are and they come to a country, and if they're not accepted, it's like, come on, they've been through so much.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she was telling us the story that she left Syria and her kids were so young and they fled to Jordan. And in Jordan, they couldn't work. And so they did
Right.
not live in a resettlement camp. They actually got an apartment. But she said we had to like live under the radar because in Jordan, we're not given work visas. Their kids can't attend the school. And so she said when we were given the option to come to the United States, refugees have to be invited to come here. So they were given the option to come and they were so relieved and so happy. And they thought, oh, we can get a better life for our children. This is why we're coming. And she said, and then we arrived in the US and we were so happy to be here. And she said, and all of a sudden I realized I can't communicate. Oh my gosh. In Jordan, we had to live under the radar, but at least we knew the language and at least we could communicate. And she said,
Mhm.
I very distinctly remember going to the grocery store one of the first days I was here. She said, I stood there and I felt like I was living my life in silence. And I felt like all these people were just passing me by and I couldn't even ask, where do I buy milk for my kids? And it's
Mm.
a story like gives me the goosebumps just to think about it because it's so true. They've been through so much. And then to come here and you want to feel like, oh, now I can take a sigh of relief. Now I'm
Mhm.
living in safety. I'm not fearing for my children's lives. And this is only the beginning.
Right.
And so, I mentioned before that I really believe that English is their ticket to help improve their lives. But another main reason I started this is because of my experience as a military spouse. I've moved 9 times in 15 years. I know a lot about having to start over. And I don't ever want to say that I know what the trauma that they've been through is like because I don't. But I do know how isolating it can feel to not have anybody to turn to. And like you were saying, I lived in Japan. I don't even recognize the alphabet, let alone the language. So it's
Right.
not like you can read a sign and kind of guess what it's trying to say.
Right.
But I thought, at least for myself, I've always had a military community to ask, like, hey, where do you take your kids to the pediatrician? How did you enroll your kids in school? How did you get a driver's license here?
Mhm.
And these families, they don't have that. So we're trying to create that for them.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your heart. Thank you for seeing the need and for wanting to do something about it. And also, I know that you had mentioned earlier your goal would be to see this program that you've developed at Refugee Assistance Alliance to go into other communities. Your model is replicable. It's something that can be done anywhere, and you've already got everything in place as far as your policies and how things work. So I do hope to see you continue to grow and really to thrive, because when you're thriving, your people are thriving, the people that you serve. And that's what it's supposed to be coming to America. It's supposed to be a welcoming place where people can just kind of breathe and know that, okay, you got here, let's help you get on your feet. And then they go work. And they're such hard workers in our communities. And so I have a question. Do you have anything coming up for your organization? Anything on the horizon that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, but I just wanted to say when you said that, it made me think I didn't say this, but we always say that our end goal is that we work ourselves out of a job with our clients.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, we hope they don't need us anymore and they can come and mentor other refugees coming in. Another thing I wanted to point out about our families is they always say, like, we don't want to be portrayed at all if people look at our social media as, oh, look at these poor people. They say, we're here and we want to thrive and we want to be part of the community and we want to participate and we want to have jobs and we want to do all of these things. And so
Right.
we really focus a lot on telling the positive side because, like you were saying earlier, there can be such a negative narrative around refugees and immigrants and asylees and stealing
Right.
jobs and fear mongering. And so, we really do work hard to paint a positive image around them.
Well, I think that's really, really important because something that you said earlier really struck me because I've been doing my own re-education on systemic racism here in the United States and this concept of white saviorism, and you said it just really well at the beginning that you're not there to empower them. I don't remember exactly how you said it, but it was, we're here to walk beside them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is powerful because it's recognizing and treating them with dignity. Like they didn't come here as babies that need everything. They're actually grown adults who made a decision to get their family out of a really bad situation and try and have a good shake at life for their kids. So recognizing the fact that they actually have skills, that they have things they can do. And I love your passion for the moms and educating the moms, something I can personally identify with. It was something that I noticed, and this is American, but it's something I noticed when I was in college and then in seminary that the guys were doing a lot of the learning and the moms were at home having babies and not really getting the benefit of that education. And I ended up starting a program in seminary, a certificate program for the student spouses so that they were also able to learn some of the language. It was more the terms and the theology and that kind of stuff, but it was stuff that their husbands were learning, and this way they could communicate with each other. And I think that, and like Melinda Gates says, when you change the life of a woman, you change the life of the community. And I see that that's what you're doing because the moms are the ones who really are the glue holding this little family together. And to be able to communicate with your children in the language of the country that you're in is really critical long term.
Yeah.
It really is for that family relationship and the unity and the bonding. So thank you for that.
I just want to say one more thing as you were talking about. A lot of times people will say, well, like, I can't relate to, I've never been a refugee. Hopefully I never will have to experience that. I can't relate. And we say, but we can all relate. It is a universal thing too. You ask any parent, what do you want for your kids? I want to give my kids a better life than I had. And so that's the kind of thing that we focus on with a lot of people. Like the reason they're here is to give their kids a shot.
Right.
There is so much instability. And just like you and me and everyone else, we just want to give our kids a chance.
Yeah. And your model is really inspirational to me to help the moms and then help the kids. And not that you're not helping the dads, because you are. I know that. But you're going where the gap is even within that family unit, which is really critical. So what is the best way for people to get in touch with you, Kristen?
The best way is through our website, www.refugeeassistancealliance.org. If you would like to support our program, here is my shameless plug. There's a donate button on our website. And then we also try to stay very active on social media. We have a Facebook and Instagram account. We're at Refugee Assistance Alliance. And we also have Twitter at Alliance Refugee.
Yes, because Twitter will not let us have long names. We're at Your Nonprofit Life on everything except Twitter. And on Twitter, we're at Your NP Life, I think. I don't know. I'll have to check it. So I'll put links to all your social media and your website and that donate page. And also maybe your LinkedIn profile in case people want to get in touch with you professionally and connect that way. All on the show notes page. And I just can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your day to have this interview with me. I'm really excited that I'm able to bring information through the podcast to the listeners that are about some issues that we really do have the opportunity to make a difference in the November election. And so we're not telling people how to vote, but let's be informed about it and make sure that you're voting your true convictions. And yeah, that's kind of all I'm going to say about that. So thank you, Kristen.
A complete honor to be here, Laura. I love you. I love your podcasts. I always love talking about REA. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I look forward to talking to you and connecting with anyone else who would like to learn more.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Kristen. And I will see you in the village.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks for listening. To access the show notes or share feedback on this podcast and link over to our socials, visit our website at yournonprofitlife.com. That's yournonprofitlife.com. And hey, if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you're going to love The Village. It's our exclusive online community where we take what we're learning in the Nonprofit Leadership Lab and apply it. We take it to the next level with live Q&As, boot camps, online book clubs, and legit support from experts committed to helping you extend your nonprofit life. By the way, since we're just getting started, it would mean the world to us if you'd subscribe to the podcast and leave a great review on iTunes. The reviews will help us get the podcast in front of more people as we try to take the whole sector from messy to thriving. See you next time.